Well, good morning. Glad you're all here. I thought it'd be good this morning to start with giving you a little context about what I'm going to be sharing with you today, because more than likely, most of you don't know who I am. And you don't know where I'm from. You don't know the work that I've done for the last 45 years. So without context, it would be understandable if you're skeptical about what I'm going to be sharing with you. You may think that Rory just invited a cranky, cantankerous old man to come talk to you, which is true, at least sometimes. I'm not always cranky and cantankerous. But first off, I'm a farmer on a family farm where I raise cattle and sheep with some of my children and grandchildren. My wife, Diane, and I have been married for over 46 years. We have 7 children, 5 boys and 2 girls, and 13 grandchildren. Our farm is located in central Texas, just north of Waco. But what I want to share with you today is also the result of my life of the past 34 years being a part of an intentional Christian agrarian community. And our community's was started over 50 years ago. And many of us raise much of our own food on our own individual homesteads and farms located near one another and within about 5 or 10 miles of one another. In addition to our family homesteads, we have a 510-acre community farm where it's right on the Brazos River, and we call this land Brazos de Dios, which is the Spanish name for the river, Rio Brazos de Dios, which means the arms of God. At Brazos de Dios, we farm using horses, and we grow corn, wheat, oats, rye, sweet potatoes, sorghum for syrup, and we have milk cows, pastured poultry, both layers and broilers. In addition to the farm, on the farm, we have a craft village, and in that craft village, we have several shops. Can you see some of that? Good. We have shops. We have a cafe where we grow a lot of the food where we sell a lot of the food that we grow. We have a woodworking shop, a pottery shop, a blacksmithing forge, fibercraft shop where we do spinning and weaving, a quilt shop, a basket shop, a leather shop, stained glass and glass blowing shop, a grist mill, and a cheese shop, a grocery market, and a general store. We have about 200 to 250,000 visitors a year come by. And, of course, one of the first things that people think, oh, they're reenactors. You know, this is a living history farm. It's maybe Branson on the Brazos. No, that's actually the way we live and the way we make our living with the crafts and with agriculture. A lot of folks come to our land, our farm, for the Ploughshare Institute for Sustainable Culture. We teach all of the crafts that I previously listed, as well as agricultural skills such as gardening, orchards, chickens, beekeeping, and horse farming, and also kitchen skills like canning and preserving, cheese making, bread making, soap making, all those things. We've taught classes for the past 29 years, and we've probably taught between 16 to 20,000 people from all over the United States and a lot of foreign countries. So what I'm sharing today is based on my life experience of these past years in agriculture and community, and also from teaching many classes at Ploughshare, where I've been an instructor for the past 25 years. But I also do consulting, helping folks set up their own farms and helping their families to set up their farm. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of context to understand what I'm going to be sharing with you. If you have questions, you can hold those till the end. We'll hopefully have some time for question and answers. Something I do in my classes that I like to do at the beginning, we can't do it because there's more of us, but I like to ask why you're here. You know, why did you come to this particular seminar? Why did you come to this class? And we don't have the time to do that, but perhaps you're here to learn more about a sustainable life. Maybe the term agrarian intrigued you, and you want to know about the art and craftsmanship and how they intersect with homesteading. But I wonder if there is a larger question here. Why are we here? Not just at this particular seminar, but why are we all here at Rory's Homesteading Festival? And that's a question I want you to hold on a minute, and we're going to get into that a little bit more deeply. Now, I'm going to do something right now that I hadn't planned to do at all. We are a community. We've been together for many, many years, and something that is a fact of life in a community is collaboration. We do a lot of things. In fact, my talk, my teaching, and a lot of what I do is collaborative. There's a lot of people that have input and share. And so my talk, when Rory asked me to come here and speak, he's visited us many times, but when he asked me to come and speak, we began working on it several months ago. And I share it with different folks. One of the ones that was hopefully going to present here, but she wasn't able to because she got sick, Dr. Kay Toombs. We worked back and forth. Another friend worked back and forth. And so about an hour ago, I get a text from one of my friends. And he's got a little section that I thought very well captures what I want, one of the things that I want to convey here. This is not the first time this has happened to me. Okay, several years ago, I was talking to I was invited to speak to the American Agricultural Consultants Association. And sure, I'll go, I'll talk. And so I speak from regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture. And I had no idea who these people were. So I go, we have a banquet at the beginning, and I'm listening, you know, trying to get a feel for this as I'm eating, and I realize these are the chemical guys. And I'm starting, while I'm eating, jettisoning parts of my talk so I don't, you know, have their food thrown at me. So anyway, this is not the first time, but I feel like it's going to more accurately express what we want to share here today. So I'm going to read some of this because, again, I feel like it really accurately describes what we want to share. I would venture to guess that most of you, if not all of us here, are here because we want to give something to our children and our grandchildren, and even generations beyond, that is going to have a lasting value to nurture life in a world that, in its pursuit of wealth and technological power, is fragmenting more each passing day. But in pursuing this goal, I think it's critically important for us to remember and to recognize that what we're reaching toward is something that just about everybody in our country and in most of the world once had. A simple life on the land based on family homesteads, living in close communities, based on traditional and generally religious values. Well, we all know that this way of life got left behind, mainly because most people became convinced that there was a better way in the pursuit of what was advertised as progress. Now, the world is 200 years into that experiment in urban techno-industrialism, and most of us who are here recognize that its results were, to say the least, a great disappointment, even grossly deficient, if not altogether a failure. So one of the questions that has to be in our minds is, how can we leave our children with a vision that's going to inspire them to continue in this simpler way of life, knowing that we want to inspire them in this way because we've seen the end of the other road, and we want to help them to see the pursuit of comfort, ease, and wealth, and escape from responsibility for life is not the way toward lasting fulfillment. So a true sustainable way of life requires, a vision that inspires future generations to sustain it. And so it seems of the utmost importance that we inspire the next generations with such a vision not just of something to pass on and continue, but a vision of reaching toward ever new frontiers that will bring our children into even deeper relationships with one another as they press upstream against the main currents of the times toward a purpose that shows that life really can triumph over every force that comes against it. Since for over 3 decades, I've been a part and participating in a community that's been reaching towards that goal and that has along the way had considerable success in passing on its vision to the next generations, I'm hoping I can share with you today some of the wisdom that we've acquired over 50 years of community life. And so I felt like that expressed, that's a collaborative effort amongst a number of us to share some of the things that we feel. So, as I said, I scuttled a fair amount of our talk because I wanted to be able to share that. But you all understand, I'm sure, that we are going upstream against the tide, against this bore tide of industrialism and all the things that are arrayed against us. And I know that's one reason why you're here. But how do we solve the problem? How do we become economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and able to pass it on to our children? And do we really just want to sustain, or do we want to have a vision to be regenerative and maybe even redemptive? And shouldn't it carry on past our lives into the lives of our children and grandchildren? So I think we need to develop not just small-scale diversified local family farms and homesteads, but we need to develop small-scale diversified local family economies. Family economies centered and rooted in community. Many say that this is a radical proposition. But while this may appear to be radical in our day and time, it's actually the way most of our ancestors lived. But in all our wisdom, we left that ancient path. So, in many respects, all of us here are pioneers. We're pioneering and looking for that path, that ancient path. But what was the primary motivation? What were the hopes and dreams and vision for the pioneers? Why did many of our forefathers leave Europe and come to the New World? My great-great-grandparents came from Germany and Moravia. They left because it was a land where there were perpetual wars. Sons were being conscripted for the perpetual wars. There was dysfunctional governments in society and failing agriculture. They saw no future where they were at. The prospects for their children were bleak. They wanted something more for their children. Their perspectives, their hopes and dreams were multi-generational. And they came here not as rugged individualists, but many times they came in groups. They came and settled in colonies as families and groups together and formed communities. And they understood that if something was worth pioneering, the perilous and taking the perilous journey overseas to very unfamiliar places and to be able to try to make a living in a wilderness, they understood if they did all this, then what they were struggling for must endure. It must go beyond themselves and their life, and it must endure into succeeding generations. Literally succeed. Their children, their grandchildren, and their grandchildren. So what we've seen in our community is that based upon our own experience, that a family growing much of its own food and selling or bartering some of its surplus and establishing home cottage businesses does very well at achieving family economic sustainability. And if it's diversified, they're using diversified holistic agriculture, environmental sustainability as well. So a cottage economy is a viable alternative to the unsustainable global economy. Artisans working in their own home workshops, working together as families. We've seen this in our own community, but we still have a ways to go. We recently started a weekly market. It serves as kind of a business incubator for families to, they're launching a new business, a new craft or something, and they're bringing their things to the local market. And we're hoping this stimulates more folks, even folks outside of our church community, to be able to participate and develop family home-based businesses. So what are the things that we need to consider when we're trying to establish a family-based economy and rooted in community? First, we've got to understand that, like our ancestors, the primary purpose of the farm is to feed the farm family. That gets lost today many times, but the primary purpose of the farm is to feed the farm family. When my children were young, all my children are grown, many of them are married, but when my children were young, we had this little coloring book from the Firestone Farm, I think it's in Michigan. And at the beginning of it, the curator of the museum describes the difference between farms of today and farms of the 17 and 1800s. And he said one of the primary differences is that they would not have understood the term cash crops because they were primarily producing to sustain themselves, and their surplus is what they sold. Many of them were craftsmen. They weren't just farmers. This is the premise of Sean and Beth Doherty's book, The Independent Farmstead. And if you don't have that book, you ought to consider it. It's actually kind of revolutionary in some of the ways that they look at things. The next thing that is it must be diversified. You've heard the saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Diversity overcomes adversity. When we plant a lot of different things, even different varieties, our farm is able to be more diverse in the face of adverse weather. And because it's a pattern of God, His creation is designed to be diverse and multidimensional. And economically, when we have multiple income streams, we become more resilient and able to weather economic changes. Another point that it should be on a family scale, something within our reach. And it should be local, using local resources as much as possible. A friend of mine, Rory Groves, wrote a book a few years ago called Durable Trades. If you're not familiar with that book, you might enjoy reading that. He lists many of the trades that are durable. Rory was a computer in computer technology, and he realized that his job was something that would change every 4 to 5 years. It was not necessarily anything that he could pass on to his children because he was obsolete and having to learn something new every year. So he was every 4 or 5 years. So he was thinking, what are the things that are going to endure, that are durable and last? And so he made a whole list of different trades that are durable. So our home cottage businesses must be time-tested, resilient, and help to build the local economy, the local community. Craft and trades that endure into the future. Durable also means that it's multi-generational. We teach, train, apprentice, and mentor our children and others of the succeeding generations, which makes our endeavor durable, in that it meets the need now, and since that need is going to continue into the future, it will therefore continue to meet that need in the future. Wes Jackson, who is a friend of Wendell Berry's and the founder of the Land Institute in Kansas, made a statement one time. He said, if you can accomplish your vision in your lifetime, your vision's too small. The next point is it should have quality craftsmanship. There should be rooted around or centered around handmade quality items such as fine furniture and hand-forged ironwork. To give you just a little illustration of some of the different things, even farmers are artisans, and you raise quality things like chickens. Is that up there, Grady? That's the difference between a local hatchery and maybe a big hatchery. Then how about furniture? This is handmade furniture versus something from IKEA. Does anybody want any heirloom particle board? And then how about something from artisan ovens as opposed to Wonder Bread? So I think you can see what I mean when I talk about quality craftsmanship. Our community is working to restore such a model through the interconnectedness of these artisans that produce this quality of crafts and homesteaders or agrarians. Just to give you some examples of families within our community that support themselves in this manner, each one of these that I'm going to illustrate has their own family homestead where they raise a lot of their own food. The first one is Mark Borman. He's a woodworker. Mark produces, with his sons, quality handmade furniture. He is also a teacher at Ploughshare, and so that's one of the ways he supports his family. Caleb Nolan also teaches. Caleb is a blacksmith. He makes very high-quality axes and scythes and all manner of blacksmithing items. Joel Lancaster and Sons. He's a turner. It's a picture of him on his spring pole lathe, turning things. So, and then there's pictures of him, of the things that he makes. Dylan McMahon is a leather worker, and he also makes wood toys. And then Randy Oakley, he teaches, but he's a beekeeper, and along with his children. So some of these folks are second and third generations. I think a question that we get quite often is, that's wonderful, but how can I learn that? Well, there's a lot of different schools out there. In North Carolina, there's John C. Campbell. There's North House in Minnesota. There's several woodworking schools. There's several schools across the country. And then there's Ploughshare. Many people come to our school to learn some of these skills. The key is that you've got to find someone who is proficient like a master craftsman. So events like the Homesteading Festival and things such as this are great for inspiration, networking, connecting with one another, meeting friends. But for in-depth mentoring, training, you really needs to be hands-on and relational. YouTube videos are good. Maybe they whet our appetite, but as far as teaching something on a more relational way, it's very difficult. I'm speaking about that as both a student and as a teacher. There's something about presence. There's something about looking into people's eyes when you're teaching and you're talking, when you're training. You get a feel. Are they picking up on this? And there is a rapport. There is a relationship that ensues. It's hard to be relational with a video screen. And so in previous times, in a lot of cultures, this transmitting and impartation of a craft was done from father to son, from mother to daughter, or through an apprenticeship. And this points up another very real need, a need for the reinstitution of fatherhood in the image and pattern of our Heavenly Father, caring, nurturing, and husbanding. We didn't get to this current state of dysfunction in our culture in one generation, and I don't think we're going to get out of it in one generation. But in our community years ago, we began taking the first steps, even very small steps. Many of us as fathers and mothers began to teach our children as much as we could, helping them, taking them to workshops and classes, working with them, and giving them as much as we could provide. And then most of them went well beyond us. Some of them went on to craft schools and learned some of their trade. And then we also brought in some of the top craftsmen in their particular areas to do classes and to train there at Ploughshare. And now many of our children are not only master craftsmen, but they're teachers as well. But in order to produce sustainably, environmentally, economically, and socially, the need is for more craftsmen, potters, woodworkers, blacksmiths, and others. Craftsmen that reproduce themselves and not mass-produce pots or furniture. Can you see how this could be a bigger project than our lifetime? Perhaps the restoration of something even beyond agriculture, the restoration of a community, then a society. This is kind of radical, isn't it? And then as we began developing small-scale, diversified family economies, this results in a sustainable life. And as more families discover this, it happens locally and then regionally. We develop guilds and other cooperative arrangements, and it really can lead to a revitalization of families and communities. And this addresses the third aspect of sustainability, society. But let's go back to the question at the beginning that I asked you. Why are we here? What is the longing in our hearts? Is it beyond sustainable or even regenerative? Could it be an inner longing for wholeness? So perhaps what we are needing and deep down longing for is a culture that can sustain or endure and regenerate, a culture that will care and nurture people into wholeness. This longing is many times articulated as get back to, as in get back to the land, back to the basics, getting back to a simpler time, the good old days. But is it even bigger than that? Not just going back, but going forward to something greater, more complete, more whole. Allan Savory wrote something in his book, Holistic Management, that struck me many years ago and was transformational when I first read it several years ago. He described holism, the paradigm shift that sees the world from the perspective of the whole. And he said that a key is seeing the world as being made up of patterns and arrangements of patterns and not merely stuff, which is interesting to me in that the word for pattern comes from the Latin word pater, which means father. So we're just looking for the design of the Father. And patterns and arrangements of patterns are relationships. So it seems to me that wholeness requires relationships. Relationships on many levels, with the land, with our families, our friends and neighbors, and certainly in a relationship with and at one with God. As a farmer, I obviously work with the soil. Whether I'm growing vegetables, grains, or forage for grazing animals, they all depend on the soil, which, if we properly understand soil, it's a network of life. It's not an inert substance, just dirt, but rather it's an amazing, complex, intricate, interwoven plexus of life. It's a culture. We use terms like cultivate. I'm going to go out and cultivate the corn. We say, what are the cultural needs of this plant? Its needs for water, sunlight, and nutrients, and so on. The things that are necessary for sustaining life. Culture can either sustain life and nurture life, or it can cause fragmentation, decomposition, and death. Either a culture of life or a culture of death. So think about regenerative agriculture in contrast to conventional industrial agriculture. Some of you may be familiar with Gabe Brown. He came down to Texas some time back and was talking to some of us. And he said, when I was a conventional farmer, one of the things that when I woke up each morning, it was, what am I going to kill today? I'm either going to kill bugs, I'm going to kill weeds, I'm going to kill fungus, or I'm going to kill disease. That was his job. Now, he's a husbandman. He is nurturing life. So we're speaking of the soil, but I believe it's analogous to and even a parable of our lives in general. In the soil, culture that nurtures and sustains life will even encourage genetic expression. So proper, healthy soil with its complex network of relationships will trigger, amplify the DNA that's in that seed to do things that maybe we didn't think were possible, to have more abundance, depth, color, nutrition, pest and disease resistance. But another aspect of healthy soil was made clear to me by Ray Archuleta several years ago. Ray is an agronomist with decades of work with the soil and serving farmers. He was helping them to farm regeneratively. He said that after 30 years of working in agriculture and studying soil, he began to see that there is much more cooperation than competition in healthy soil. Cooperation instead of competition. Think of that for a moment. Does that not correlate to human culture as well? And I believe it points the way to seeing and understanding this bigger picture. The last issue of Acres USA, which is some of you may be familiar with, it's a magazine for regenerative agriculture. In the latest issue that just came out about a week or two ago, John Kemp, who is an Amish farmer and well-known and highly respected writer and speaker, wrote this: I believe that it is a problem to define regenerative agriculture in terms of soil health because regenerative agriculture necessarily needs to be much greater. We need to have a greater vision. We need to have a larger imagination. Regenerative agriculture, a culture rooted in the land. And land is dependent upon culture. John is seeing and describing what many of us that have been involved in agriculture, even regenerative agriculture, for many years have seen. That as wonderful as regenerative agriculture is, as wonderful as homesteading and a family economy are, there has to be something more. All of those fall short of addressing the need for wholeness that we're longing for. And sadly, we see it in the difficulties in relationships, even as homesteaders and farmers. Wonderful farms with abundant, nutrient-dense food and beautiful pastoral scenes seem hollow when human relationships are broken, dysfunctional, and even falling apart. Which, as I said, unfortunately, is something even in regenerative agriculture and homesteading we see much too often. In the article, John Kemp goes on to write about the Harvard study of adult development, which has been ongoing for about 80 years, so it's a multiple generation study. He states, the central finding of the study, the one that I find most intriguing and powerful, is that there is one factor that supersedes all others in correlating to longevity and to a sense of well-being and fulfillment: the depth and quality of our personal relationships, particularly the relationships with our family and immediate peers. Going back to our illustration of the soil, it is created, hardwired, you could say, to connect and build relationships, to cooperate, to be synergistic and symbiotic. Soil scientists repeatedly find these characteristics in the culture of healthy soil. Again, I believe it is true of people too. We are hardwired to connect, and we are not fulfilled, feeling whole, if we are apart from others. So it seems to me community is essential. But I don't believe it's just any community or even what we might label as community that will truly meet the need. I think it's a different kind of community, not just going back to the 1950s or a little house on the prairie. That may be an improvement, but as wonderful as they may have been, something more is going to be required to withstand the onslaught that we are facing in the current culture. What's needed is communities bound together by care and a love that never fails and overcomes all. I've been farming or gardening in some capacity for over 40 years. I've come to the conclusion that community, vibrant, caring, loving relationships with one another, geographically close, local, interacting on a daily, sometimes moment-by-moment basis, is essential for true sustainability and real regeneration, satisfying the deep down longing for wholeness. We need others, and we need to be needed. We're hardwired for it. For the past 34 years, I've experienced this kind of community, and I can tell you it's possible. This longing can be fulfilled. The dream can come true. The current culture we live in is senseless and suicidal, killing and consuming its young and discarding its elderly. The global economy, the technoculture we live in, can be a brutal, uncaring machine that destroys lives and destroys souls. Many people today feel like we're at an inflection point. Perhaps we are. How do we gain a culture of care and compassion? John Kemp concludes his article by stating a truth about human relationships. He states that if you want to change the world, begin with yourself. I agree, and that we build bridges of care, becoming caring people in caring communities, caring for our families, our friends, our land, living lives of care and compassion. In the soil, we look for and nurture relationships. This is a parable of what we should do, what we must do in the relationships around us. Wouldn't it be wonderful if all across the land there weren't just family homesteads, but communities of family homesteads. Communities that are like an ark, like Noah's Ark. What was Noah's Ark? It was a repository of the knowledge and the skill and the genetics to carry life forward. I spoke earlier about the need for fatherhood. What is the primary thing a father should do? He should inspire, impart, transmit, and instill a vision in his children, because hopefully he has a vision for something beyond himself. He desires that his children succeed him, that they carry on his hopes and dreams further than he did, that they would not merely sustain what he has done, but instead they would advance it and take it to a higher level. Consider a few long-term projects like soil health, building soil in a farm ecosystem to the place where it yields nutrient-dense food far exceeding what one can buy. Food that heals, food as medicine, that's not the exception, but it's the norm. Or genetics, developing crops adapted to and thriving in our local ecosystem, not just off-the-shelf genetics. And the same for animals, developing and breeding animals for our specific area. Consider the amazing work of farmers generations ago that gave us many of the breeds that we now have. What a project, a long-term multi-generational project to develop a breed for one's farm. Aren't these projects worthy projects for our children and our grandchildren? But beyond these things, isn't this way of life something worth passing on? If what we're doing cannot endure into the succeeding generations, then we have failed. We did not succeed. Diane and I started on this journey over 46 years ago. Many called us radical. We began homeschooling 40 years ago, when it was almost unheard of and of questionable legality. People said we were crazy. That's too radical. Then as we became part of the community that we're now a part of, we birthed our children at home. Again, radical. We grew our own food and established home-based businesses so that I and other fathers could work from home with their families. And we're seeing this continue on in the succeeding generations, even now the third generation. At weddings in our community, and we have a lot of weddings, at the end of the ceremony, we dance a traditional Israeli dance called the Hora. We have a number of Israelis in our community, and they taught us this dance called the Hora. And we sing a blessing over the couple. May you see your children and grandchildren. Why? Why would we do this? Because we understand, we feel, we are passionate that something must carry on and must succeed. As important as crops and chickens and cows and crafts are, what I'm speaking of is the enduring values and character in people that will allow us to thrive and flourish. Care, compassion, love, this is what we must transmit. In some ways, all of this wonderful life on the farm is superfluous. And in the end, it may be taken from us in one way or the other. In closing, I'd like to say that I hope I've been able to help you see the amazing possibility and purpose that we have as pioneers. And also that you recognize and feel the necessity of connecting, of relationships, and the necessity of caring, loving, compassionate communities. And I hope I have sparked a desire within you to transmit to the next generations a passion and a zeal to continue to pursue this exciting vision of exploring and developing new vistas so that they may go further and have even more knowledge, understanding, and wisdom than us, moving ever upward in increasingly caring relationships, wholeness, meaning, and life in the midst of an increasingly fragmented technological world based on fantasy, diversion, and mindless entertainment. Isn't this a wonderful calling and task that we have? Thank you. I'll take any questions if you have them.